Welcome back, beautiful ones. We are here once again, and I do believe this is episode 17,
Wow. I
which
haven't even been
feels
counting.
good. Yeah, we're navigating through on this journey, and I really love now reflecting back on so many powerful conversations that we've already had, and it feels as if we're only really still like beginning to dive into the depths of conversation and vulnerability and openness that I feel will continue to grow as we spend more time pulling back layers in these conversations. But yeah, episode 17 of the Wisdom of Womanhood podcast. I am thrilled to be here and am really excited about this part two. If you haven't already, episode 16 definitely ties in with this episode as well. So make sure you listen to them together. It'll be really helpful. I am Showy Moon, and Pippa is fresh off holiday mode.
I know, I'm just like getting back into the reality mode of work and life, but it feels really good. Like I definitely had eye-opening experiences where I visited. I went on a cruise up to Papua New Guinea and just the culture there, I've seen a lot of different cultures that are very like third world. But I wouldn't really like say how they live is third world in a sense. Like there is poverty there, but it's just the community is what I really just was like, wow. So there was an island
Mm.
called Kirawina Island, and they literally have no running water, like fresh running water. They don't have any electricity. The guy who's our guide, he you come off the ship on the tender and they obviously they want money. So it's like they say, "Can I be your guide today?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, sure." So he took us to his village and like the huts they live in, like they've built them themselves from like wood and like tools on the island. And like seven of them just sleep on the floor. And I just relished for a moment. I was so emotional on that trip. Being pregnant, extra emotions are there
Mm.
anyway. But there's an element of like that the culture and the community, like they all look out for each other. And like
Mm.
the main guy said, who's kind of the chief of the island, said whatever money goes to each person is collectively for the whole greater good. And but also you saw, the poverty and the sickness and like, the malnourishment and also the conservation side, they were pulling turtles out the water and stuff, and it's just not nice to see, but then they need to eat and survive. So there's a lot of opportunities for non-judgment there as well. Like I felt that judgment wanting to come in, like, oh, they can't eat turtles, and because they are endangered, especially the hawksbill. That's my husband's kind of field of work. But at the same time, they need to eat, and that provides food and also provides shell, which is used for selling on for different things. So eye-opening for sure. And coming back with they've actually invited us back when baby's here. They're like, we want to see baby when he's back here. Can you come on another cruise? I was like, yeah, we will try. So they're just lovely people. They're so kind. They just want to do so much for you. And them seeing you, they're so curious about us as well. What's your life like back in Australia, New Zealand, because a lot of
Mm.
Aussies were there, and telling them how we live, and they're just like they're just
Mm.
like so it just gave me a lot of gratitude for my life and gratitude for what I've got in my life, and reflecting on that too. And then thinking about the topics we talk about and the trauma they have and the mother wounds they have and the father wounds they have, and like I was thinking about that on the cruise, like how they differ to each culture. Is that something that they actually think about? Do they even know about it? Because there's no internet, there's no like outside world communication. They get 10 ships a year to communicate with the outside world. So I'm really glad that we get to talk about these topics because I really wish that they could hear this, like they would take a lot from it.
Do you also think, as well as that the difference in culture, even when you think about like system regulation, seven people sleeping together in a space is so co-regulating. Like the amount of regulation and support that their systems would naturally feel. And then there would be obviously the dysregulation element when you look at things like lack of resources and malnourishment and stuff like that. That the difference that can happen in terms of how prominent trauma is when you're in an environment where you're constantly supported by the collective is very different, as opposed to a culture where you are very much in a state of you either learn how to self-regulate or you're in constant dysregulation because we're not in contact very much, or a community that doesn't raise up those that need the support. Like in our country, it is insane that a quarter of our children live underneath the poverty line. That is incomprehensible considering the amount of resources that we have as a collective. However, this whole concept of oneness and separation and like sticking to your own thing and tall poppy syndrome and all these things that separate us, it's an interesting thing to kind of sit with where it's crazy that a lot of our society would be more traumatized than those of second or third world.
Yeah.
That's
And
fucked.
what I loved about him, his name was Philip. He was so proud of his village. Like he took us back to his little village. There's probably like about 10 huts in a circle. And they have different, they're all tribe, all one tribe, but they have different villages throughout. And he's just like, this is where we sleep, and this is my wife, and here's the chickens. And they had the pigs are sacred there. So they had little like pet pigs and things like that. And obviously I was a male element, so I was just like, just and just how proud he was. Like he's got
Yeah.
4 daughters and he's got one adopted daughter, so he's got 5 girls, and he's like, here are my girls, and they come and saying hi, and they're like, just they're just so welcoming. And I was thinking like that there's so much they don't know. There's so much that they are not aware of. Like you just said, they don't have a lot of outside communication apart from us coming in off a boat for half a day. And yeah, just when we were talking about what do you do for work, and they asked Chris what he did for work, and they were kind of like they didn't understand it in us, so I had to kind of make it more like basic, like, oh, I'm a teacher, or I'm, something that they would understand. And so it just made me really think about it. Like on the cruise that night when we got back on the ship, I just was really, me and Chris were very like, talking about like what we experienced that day and what was some of the things we took from the day. And then we spoke about that, like the wounding, and like, are they aware of trauma? Are they aware of the like, you know, this obviously we didn't get time to talk about different things like that, but I wonder what they think and feel about things like that. Like they'll obviously all have trauma. They have poverty trauma. They've lost loved ones through sickness and things like that. Thankfully, COVID never touched them, so they never got any COVID on the island because no one no one went there. So it was like they were totally protected, and they never
Well, not even not receiving the virus, but the fact that they weren't part of the fear propaganda.
Yes.
Like that in itself is huge.
Yeah, they didn't
That
they
they
have no
didn't go
news.
through the
Like,
collective
yeah.
trauma, that was happening throughout the rest of the world. These isolated communities had the benefit of not being subject to mass nervous system dysregulation through fear.
And he'd lost his mother like 2 weeks prior to us being there. He said, would you like to see where I buried her? So we didn't obviously go right over there, but he buried her himself. And I said, oh, do you have a ceremony like for the, he said, no, he said, just family. We just bury them ourselves. And it's like, and then just thinking about how there's a process for how when we lose a loved one in this world, like in our world, like how
Mhm.
the process is, you have to go through funeral directors, you have to go through this, and you have to buy this and pay for this, and he just literally dug a lovely, beautiful hole and did a big Mother Earth thing and just honored her. And I just thought, wow, we're so sold in this collective here in this world, our world, that we can't just honor our own dead. Like we have to like go through a process and pay someone else to do it for us. Like there's lots of things going on in my brain and my depth of my brain, and just coming back to this father wound of like, he lost his father very young, so he, I don't know, he didn't say why or how, but he just said he lost his father very young, and his mother died 2 weeks prior to us being there, so we were saying sorry, and he didn't see it as like a upsetting thing.
Mhm.
He just was like, she lived a very, very good life, and she was, there was no like, oh. He just there was no victim I felt like there was no victim mentality with him. He just was like, it's it like it just it is what it is. Like he just it's part of their life. It's part of the way they live and seeing them dressed in the they were doing cricket and they were doing these like dances with these whistles and there was one that was like the funny Joker at the back and the kids were laughing and laughing and laughing. It was just so good to see. And half of them are like naked, like there's teenage girls with the boobs out, like and there's the experience to judge and that's where I didn't. I just said, I'm so grateful to be around these types of people, but you could hear the sniggering and you could hear the
Mm,
with people and Chris and I just held hands and I was just like tears rolling down my face with just like the joy and seeing the kids laugh and they're just happy. So
free.
yeah, it was really beautiful experience.
Mm. And there's like two big things that you just brought into that is grief. Like our process of our very Western process of grieving is so fractured and dismantled. Whereas I can imagine, and I know I'm making some assumptions, but I know that more tribal and grounded and isolated or separated from the paradigm of a lot of our modern societies, they fucking know how to grieve. Like they
Yeah.
do it in the way that they've always done it. It doesn't have all of these concepts above it. And then shame. There's so much less shame integrated into society when it hasn't been put upon them from outside. The shame around the body, the shame around expression, the shame around these things. It's so prominent and holds so many people in these tightly bound lives and ways of living and being that we have in our societies. It's so unhumane. Like it's inhumane the way that we shame ourselves and that we don't really feel the things we're feeling and that we judge other people and think we're separate. And then you go and see the way that other people live and you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah,
What
and
are we
also
doing?
like it made me realize about doing what's right for you as well, because when we were talking to the wife and the kids, it was like they have a school there, but it's not obviously, it's built there and they have their own education thing. And we were talking about how like our world, like there's homeschooling options, there's actual education. They would kill and die to put their kids in a mainstream school, like, the ones that we have here in the towns. And then I said, well, there's a lot of mums and dads that want to homeschool, because sometimes the education system doesn't fit with them. And just seeing that there's different sides to the coin and that they would just kill to send them to mainstream because they don't understand what homeschooling is because they don't feel like they have the tools to homeschool their own kids. So it's like, putting into perspective, like I just said to Chris, like always do what's right for you and what feels right for you, and always follow what like I said with every single thing, there's judgment, and as long as it fits you and feels right for you and it's in alignment with your values, that's okay. Just that's okay. That's enough. That is enough. So I just was like, it was really eye-opening, and I feel like this podcast episode's talking about culture and like I think it's beautiful. Like we'll touch on father wound, but I feel like that's the way this conversation's going. Is like it makes me emotional thinking about it now, like how I felt seeing them, and then after that go into the conflict islands, which is like 10 people live on it because they do conservation on the island, and go into the turtles, the baby turtle. The
Mm.
conservation place, seeing the baby turtles and what they're doing for them, and they're really stopping the poaching because the poaching's actually illegal. And I just got emotional there. I was like, oh my God. So just seeing the differences of like these men that live on this little island that is obviously inhabited. It's no one lives there. There's nothing there. They have to bring stuff from the mainland. They were ex-poachers. So they were
Oh,
ex-poachers. And then to sit and listen to them make a change like that happened in Africa. Those people poaching the rhinos and the rhino horns and the elephant tusk, and they changed. They're now rangers, so they range
mm.
the reefs to make sure there's no poachers because the turtles are protected. So it was just so interesting to see both sides of the coin. I literally saw two turtles on the backs ready to be slaughtered to be eaten, and I was obviously upset seeing that because I love animals so much. But then I thought to myself, what's the difference between seeing a turtle there on the
Mm-hmm.
floor trying to flap to get away, to then seeing a reef shark on a barbecue, or me eating cat like a steak that night
Mm-hmm.
or chicken the day after. And I just felt like saying, okay, so the judgment there is like, oh, but it's a turtle. But hang on, no, it's like just because it's not a fish, like it's a reptile. There's just the concept of the letting it all go and surrendering to the fact that it's upsetting that I saw it, but that's fed the whole village. So I'm just in that element of like, you can't really do much, and it's you've just got to like kind of take it with a pinch of salt when you see those types of things, you know?
Mm, yum. Not the turtle. I don't eat any animals.
Well, actually, they didn't know this, but they're trying to teach them, the ones that, because they don't know that I think it's hawksbill turtle is really poisonous for human consumption. So they're trying to
Mm.
teach them that, if you are going to go poach a turtle, don't go for the hawksbill. I think it's the green turtles. But again, like you got both sides of the coin. You got the people fighting to save them and the people that know that it's food. It's literally food and they catch them. So it's a tough one when you're in that where you can see both sides. It's tough. But
I
yeah,
think
not
it's
none
no
for
matter
me.
what. And I think it's, whatever experience you're going into, being open to what it can gift you and then bring those lessons into your life. Right. Don't like go and have the experience. It has brought up lots of thoughts and emotions and then like go back to your life,
Mm.
which I know you wouldn't do, but it's like, okay, I've stepped outside of my paradigm and my reality and I've experienced something outside of that. What lessons can I take from that I can bring into my human experience to then enhance this way of being and then enhance community and share these things so that we're not all living like on autopilot, right? And
Oh,
sometimes it's
yeah.
things have to drop in that are so foreign for us to then contemplate and be in that we go, okay, is there a different way it could be living? Is there a different way it could be being? Like, what more could I take from this? How can I be inspired from other parts of humanity so I can contribute to humanity in a more positive way?
Oh, like that night, because we just get served our food, it's all inclusive on the cruise. And I just sat and thought to myself, that meal has been cooked by a chef, it's been put on a plate, but then when you go back even further, it's been farmed, it's been taken into a slaughterhouse, so just like the depth of that process and the fact that we're oblivious to it. Like most of us, we're oblivious. We just go to
I'm
New
not.
World, we buy our meat, we buy your produce, and then we just cook it. We don't sit and think like, oh shit, like back in the day we would have had to go out hunting for that kind of stuff. And I know we know that, but what do we take the time to sit like, so that like since that day, I've just been like taking a moment every time I do eat meat or I do eat vegetables or whatever it is, and just saying like wherever you've come from or wherever you've been, I'm grateful and thankful that you're feeding me right now. Like, so you're feeding my baby too, So there's just this extra level of gratitude
Mm.
for my food consumption because,
Mm.
and even my running water. Like I saw these little kids that were naked and they were like in the stream. There was they'd had rain and there was water coming off this rock,
Mm.
and they're just like playing and just like washing the hair. And I just was like, I get to go back to my cabin later and have a hot shower. Like,
Yeah.
I know it sounds basic and you've might have heard this
Mm.
before, but when you see it and you really like have the depth and the self-awareness, there's another layer to it for sure. And I've been pregnant as well. That's definitely made things deeper for me.
Mm. Hmm. Thank you for sharing. I hope that everyone can take something from that.
I hope so.
You don't have to be the one in the lived experience to take the lessons from seeing different ways of living. This is why I'm such a big advocate for travel and for
Oh,
getting in amongst different cultures and for seeing the way that different people live and are in community and are in communication and all these things, because it's so easy to be like, oh, this is the only way, or this is the best way.
oh yeah. Oh, the
Like,
right way.
be yeah, be open to the possibility that we could be doing better, because that is evolution. Otherwise, we're in stagnant communities and we don't want to live in stagnant communities.
No, and I'd love to take the kids there. We said that with the boys. I'd love to take the boys there just to see how, like, not just to show them how lucky and they are, and they have a life that's beautiful, but just so they see the other culture, they see how kids are living, and they would love it because they would talk to the kids and they would be like, hi, and but it's good to see. That's why I think travel's important for kids, because like you said, they see the other cultures and they're like, oh, holy shit. And the gratitude starts early.
Yeah.
Mm.
Beautiful. Okay. We are going to dive now into a conversation that will flow on from last week's episode, where we spoke about the mother wound. And thank you to all of the people that reached out. I had quite a few listeners reach out and share how much they related to different parts of both of our stories. And also just the appreciation for actually speaking into these topics, because when we start to speak about these things, there is an element of taboo that still sits there with them, of like taboo and discomfort and the acceptance of seeing the humanness and imperfections in our caregivers.
Mm.
And it's a deep process and uh, a very uncomfortable process a lot of the time, to see the ways that those relationships potentially have impacted the way that we've navigated through the world, and to also not do it from a blaming victim perspective, but from a let's acknowledge it so that I can, and therefore you can all experience a better quality of life and healthier love and healthier connections. So this conversation, we are going to speak about the father wound, what it is, what it can look like, the different ways that it can play out, and then how it affects our relationships, our perspective on men, and also our own masculine within ourselves, the masculine qualities we have within ourselves. So we're going to speak from the perspective of women, obviously, because it's a woman's podcast. And when we kind of dive into the relationship aspect, yes, we're talking about hetero relationships, but also we're talking about sibling relationships. We're talking about friendships. We're talking about co-workers. When we use that term, it's all of the times that we're in relation to men. So our early years, our first 3 years of life, 70 to 80% of our connections, our synapses in the brain are formed. And so in those first 3 years of life, nearly all of the beliefs that we will have around how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we see attachment and connection are formed. So our caregivers around that time in particular, and the relationships we form, can and do impact a lot of our life going forward. So if you have in those early years had a father or father figure that has maybe been emotionally distant, physically, emotionally, mentally, sexually abusive, that has been hasn't been present at all, maybe has been absent, that hasn't been emotionally regulated, and remember, none of these things are coming from a blame place. We're living in a society where majority of our men aren't being taught so many of these things, like aren't being taught how to regulate their emotions, how to feel their emotions, how to regulate their emotions, how to communicate, how to be dads. There's so much support now for the mother, which we're so celebrating, 100% celebrating. Like, we want the support for the mama. That's so important. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment for mamas who are in like mental health crisis, and it's so great, and we're celebrating it. And the lack of education and support for our men and our fathers, and that transition, which is a transition of grief again. It's a big initiation, becoming a father. Any dad will tell you that. In whatever way it was, it's a big initiation. Even when we look at things like postnatal depression, like a lot of people don't know that dads can get postnatal depression. Like, it is very, very common, much more common than we think it is. And so from a place of compassion, we start to look at this process and what it may have been for us. If we were in those young years and any of those things occurred and we didn't feel that safe connection and that safe attachment that we were yearning for, as a young baby, toddler in those years, then it then impacts how we feel about support, particularly from men in our lives.
Yeah.
And that can then carry on for the rest of our lives. And also how we see ourselves and our ability to hold ourselves.
Yeah, I'm hearing listeners say after listening to you, how do I heal my father wound? That's the big
Yeah.
question, isn't it? It's because I think from everyone's life's different, and I touched upon my mother wound on the last episode, but with father wound, it's been quite interesting because a lot's come up for me with my dad last week, 2 weeks, and just noticing something like behavior patterns with my dad. And actually, I haven't yet, because I've just got back off holiday and I'm just settling in. I'm going to have a very open, honest conversation with him, which I've never done before, in a sense of what I want to talk about. Is something that he does, as a pattern, which is no blame on him. It's his behavior, it's his learned behavior from probably his mom or dad. Is just how he portrays it across is quite hurtful to me. Like, he doesn't say anything mean. It's just my interpretation is I'm not good enough. I'm not doing enough. And I absolutely love my dad. He's just the salt of the earth, beautiful man. But I notice it when you have that self-awareness, you notice in your parents, like, oh, like that's his programming. And again, I don't blame him for it, but I have to be honest and say, hey, Dad, when you say those things, like, even though you're saying it with love because you love me, it does hurt my feelings. And I
Mhm.
want to say, I'm gonna think about how I want to say it, because I want it to come across in a way where I just want it to be open. And he needs to be aware of it too, because he might not be aware of the fact that it's hurting my feelings. And if he doesn't know, he won't change how he says things. So I'm nervous about it, because I just kind of go, oh, it's okay, like just get on with it, because I don't normally let things bother me too much. But Chris mentioned it to me last week on the cruise. He said, it's bothered you, that, hasn't it? I said, yeah, it has, actually. Not because it was like mean, it was just, it's about work and what I earn. So it's like when I start having clients, he's like, oh, you're earning money now. Like, so it becomes this dynamic of like, when I have money. So it's like, I want to be a good girl and, oh yeah, daddy, I've got loads of clients. Yay. Well, I don't want it to be like that. I'm doing it for my own work. And I know he wants me to do well, and I know he wants me to exceed, but I'm just, for me, that's healing a father wound for me. That's, even though it might not look a certain way or be a certain way, for me, it just, that self-awareness in me is healing my relationship on deeper levels, no matter what it looks like.
And it's that respect for yourself, right? And our relationship to our fathers in this conversation is when we begin to dive further into ourselves and the way that we are and our attachment styles and our love languages and all those parts of us. It's about being so much in integrity towards ourselves that it's okay having uncomfortable conversations with our fathers, because it is in the discomfort that we find like the depth and more authenticity and more truth and more honesty. And so I did a Totokumai session today at one of the local colleges, and this session was on when relationships go wrong, and we spoke about going into uncomfortable conversations when it's necessary. And the big thing we spoke about was I statements. And it's a really good tip if you are navigating through or going into raising any conversations with dad, coming from that I place. I feel, I need, I want, I have noticed, because as soon as we go into the you did this, you do that, you are
Yeah,
this,
the
you are that,
point.
you make me feel
Yeah.
like this, it's very attacking and defensive. So that would definitely be a strategy I would say to put in place if you are going into discomfort. And if you are at a place where it's kind of like, there'll be some openness to that and you'll be able to go through it, absolutely use those strategies. And also, I would say, don't be attached to the outcome of that conversation.
Mm.
Because, if you're around about our age, we've got parents who are the generation above us and who have potentially spent 50 years living in patterning that they're not even aware of. And so when we can go into conversations without an attachment to the outcome, but with like you said, I want to have this conversation with like a man I love dearly and I care about, because there are things that potentially he's not aware of. But if he is aware of them, then maybe that can help him like to be a better man in life, be a better grandfather, be a better father, but us not be attached onto it or
Mm.
go like, if he changes it, then this, or I need, in order for me to feel accepted, valued, cared, I need this response. You know, it's again like bringing back that autonomy to our own experience, but still recognizing the parts that have played out along our lives that are in relationship to our fathers.
Yeah. And there's something that
Um,
I do with clients. It's a workbook that we do. It's our trauma generational timeline. If we can do that. So we have our timeline of our own trauma, and then we have our family tree. And it's really important. Like if I have clients that really want to like, speak to mom or dad or auntie or uncle or nan and granddad about something, they do the trauma timeline first so they can kind of go, oh, well, dad had a really difficult mother, or you just start to see the nuggets like, and I know my dad had a really strict mom. Like my nan died when I was 10, so I didn't really like know her that much as I got older. But when I've been telling about my work and then narcissistic behaviors, mentioning things like that, he's like, well, my mum was like that, or my mum said things like that. So he's becoming like kind of, more aware of it. But the more your like family generational stuff, because some people don't. And unfortunately, I have clients that, their parents have passed away and they haven't got any grandparents. So they're kind of like they feel stuck. So they focus on their own and the possibilities of what could have been. And for me, like we said on the last podcast, my dad's just doing what he knows how to do, and I think having a daughter like me really opens up, I had that conversation with my mum, which brought me and mum close together. And now with my dad, I think there's just an element where I need something to heal there with dad. And I feel like
oh,
I
even
think,
catching that. You
say
need
again.
something to heal. Like
Well, I was just
even
about to
that
say from that
statement
from
is
that
a
language,
charge.
there's something I feel there's something where because he had a mum that was like, oh, there was not, it was never good enough. Like his wife was never good enough, his job was never good enough, his new car was never good enough. There's
Mm,
something playing out in him through me, if that makes
mm,
sense. And I feel like there's
mm,
something there that we're generationally going to heal. And I'm like so proud of
mm,
that. Like I'm so proud of the
mm,
fact that this conversation could lead to beautiful blossoming of like, I'm healing my dad too. I'm my grandma. It's like,
mm,
I feel that in my heart.
mm. That's beautiful. It ties into family constellation work as well. Which actually now I would really love for us to interview a dear friend of mine who does family constellation work because it's really fascinating. If you haven't heard of it, for now, I would suggest that you go and take a look. You can have a look online, but it's really powerful therapy that involves transmuting fragmentation throughout family lines. I've done some of it before, and it's been fucking profound. And like you were saying before, those lines that can go throughout generation where it's traumatic events or beliefs that have come in, it helps us to work with that. Um, Okay, so that's like the conversations we've spoken about in terms of that element of the father wound are there's definitely leeway and there's space that you can move to, like having conversations with dad if behaviors have come up. However, there's also done this end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
which is abusive father, absent father, like neglectful father. Like when I did ages ago, I did like child abuse, personal development, professional development, really important to remember that neglect is a form of abuse as well,
Yeah.
which isn't spoken about very much. We often think about the different kinds of physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Neglect is a form of abuse as well. It has a very deep imprint in the body. And again, a lot of this is societal conditioning around like mum stays at home with the kids, dad goes and works to provide because there's this very providing element of what it is to be in the masculine. But that providing can often be great. Well, I'll financially provide and I'll provide the stability, but then maybe I'm not emotionally present.
Mm.
Or maybe I'm like away for work 60 hours a week or months at a time or whatever it is. And sometimes that absence isn't due to the fault of anyone. It is due to circumstances, and it still can leave a deep fucking wound.
Mm.
Like a deep wound of dad was never there. Like dad was never there. I couldn't rely on him. I couldn't trust him. He wasn't the one I could go to.
Yeah.
Like I never even felt like I could get to know him. And so or the element of abusive father, of
Or even
mentally and
losing a
physically
father, like, passing away
losing a
when you're a
father
child.
young.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not having the father there, or being completely absent. And so what that can do, and the things that that can impact, are things like safety for us with men, so not feeling safe with men. And I have a lot of female clients that do not feel safe with men, and nearly all of the times we can trace it back to there being an early either father relationship or early male figure in their life that they did not feel safe with, that then they've created that belief. And remember, when we're looking at trauma, it can start off with one event or multiple events, which then turns into an ingrained belief and patterning in the system. So then you're navigating through life only attracting men who you can't feel safe with, because your
Yeah.
whole concept is men aren't safe and I can't trust them. So then you're bringing that in to solidify that idea and that belief. Or it can be like men are harmful, all of those things that can come in because of those early stages of wounding. And sometimes people will be like, why the fuck do I keep attracting emotionally unavailable men? Why do I keep doing this? Why am I still in this? And it's because there's a patterning that is occurring. And when that belief is so ingrained, that is safety. So that part of you that is always trying to hardwire you for safety will keep you in the safety of the certainty of the uncertain man, as opposed to the unknown and the potential of the safe, stable man.
Yeah.
And it's really important to be compassionate around this. I was working with a client just a couple of days ago around this, and there was this like really beating herself up, and so her situation around her relationship to the masculine was that one day all of a sudden her husband died. She got a phone call to say he was in hospital, on the way to hospital. They wouldn't tell her anything else. She actually found out through Stuff, that's a news agency here in New Zealand, that her husband had died instead of finding out. And then 2 weeks later, she found out she's pregnant with her third baby. And so her belief then was like, loving a man equals loss.
Yeah.
Like loving a
Yeah.
man equals loss. And then when we started looking back at unlocking some of the earlier stuff, there was some stuff with her dad as well, and this instability and not feeling safe. And so then she just kept going back to essentially like the fuck boy. Like she kept going back in this relationship now to this guy. She's like, and I know I'm going to him because there's no emotional depth and because he just treats me like shit. And that's safer than actually diving into the unfamiliar of opening your heart up to a man
Yeah.
where there's the potential for loving someone and losing them. So for a lot of us who not me, I say us, my journey with my dad has been very, very different because of the severity of my relationship with
Mhm.
my mother. My mom left when I was 9 months old. So my dad was a single dad, which is like fucking unheard of. A single dad, and then met my stepmom when I was 2. And there are things we've had to journey through. Like definitely there were some elements of neglect that I felt, I felt like I was an inconvenience to their life a lot. And then I felt really hurt and abandoned when I went and moved in with my mother. Uh, Even though now I understand there were different dynamics, even though now I understand she was brainwashing me, manipulating me, and I now understand they felt rejected and neglected. But I had to work through those. Like I had to sit with, how could my father send me to a home where there's physical and emotional abuse?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how could my father not stand up for me? Like, where it felt like I wasn't protected by the masculine. And then I was living in a home with an abusive woman, and so there was not the man there to protect me, and then there was the woman that was abusing me, and then I was in like really toxic relationships with men for so long. And this is the other element that's really important for the deep parts of the father wound is I developed hyper independence, which was a trauma response, which is an unhealthy masculine quality, because I just got it into my belief system was no one's going to take care of me. I just have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
Like no man is going to be there. I can't rely on a man to be there. I couldn't rely on boyfriends. I was just bringing in these relationships, and bless, I really aim to speak highly of my ex-husband because he's a great father in so many ways. However, I definitely know that in that relationship there were traits of passivity within him, and that lack of leadership
Yeah.
that then I stepped into. So then I essentially became like the masculine in a lot of ways in our relationship
Yeah.
dynamic, in that 7.5 year marriage and relationship, and then mothering. And so that can occur as this unhealthy masculine quality within us. And like I've had conversations around this. Like I see some things sometimes and they're like, oh, just soften into your feminine. And I have this moment of being like, well, fuck you. Because in some situations we have to because the men aren't doing it. And I'm saying that from like, I'm gonna be really fucking honest. Like that shit triggers the fuck out of me. I'm like, can we also in that conversation say, let's help our men to be more in their strength and their leadership so that then our women can also soften into their feminine? Like being a single mother for like 6.5 years now, I really have to do this balance of I have to be in my masculine now because I have to get shit done. But it's healthy now. Like it's a healthy version because I've healed the masculine wounding within me.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, it was this hyper independent, like, I never fucking ask for help. I'm just going to get it done because I can't rely on anyone. Like, I always have to be this. Whereas now, I'm like, I do the stuff, but I'm also like, hey, please can I have some help? Hey, like, I'm not really doing very well on this. Or when I go into my partnerships, like the relationship I have now is I just like that because I'd healed it within myself, soften straight in, like
Yeah.
allow myself to be led. Like I'm not in that, but it's a subtle form of that father wounding that can occur within us as women is also that within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so like the advice around that would be work, like get some support because it's quite a complex dynamic to unravel. And honestly, I couldn't have done a lot of the work I've done by myself. I'm going to be really
Mhm.
honest. I don't think that the mother wound and the father wound, when they're at that depth, are things that you can work through yourself. You need somatic therapies,
Yeah.
like your breath works, like the stuff I do, body processing, hypnotherapy, like a lot of that stuff, because a lot of it is belief systems that are hardwired into the nervous system. And you can't think your way out of nervous system
No.
patterning. It doesn't
No.
work.
No, and just
Yeah.
touch on a lot of my relationships were me being like the masculine and the
Yeah.
breadwinner, and me like
Yeah.
needing them to fix them. Like I felt like I was the therapist half the time. There was kind of like, and I
Hmm.
used to just be like, I just want a man to look after me. Like I want someone to just come in and just take a role of a masculine to be like, I'm here for you in all these ways. And now I have that with Chris. But what I love about Chris and I is that dynamic of both of us are in feminine and masculine when we need to be. So there's just
Yeah.
element where Chris is happy to be in his feminine, and I love that about him. He's not that kind of man. He's just both. He's all of it.
Yeah.
So it's like I like looking back at relationships. Yeah, they were always like. I think a lot of them stemmed from obviously my dad's worked really hard. So there's this element of like I felt like they were always competing with my dad. With like the money
Mm.
aspect and you know, I think one of my exes did say like, I feel like I'm always going to be in competition with your dad. I'm like, well, my dad doesn't ever give that off to you. That's your internal like process of
Mm.
that. And I think there's just this. I feel, and I want to watch how I word this because I don't want to make it a statement. I think a lot of my muchness was too much for them. And that at the time was upsetting for me because it reaffirmed a wounding that I am too much. So it was kind of that dynamic of like, now my muchness, like I am needy and clingy. That's something that I love being that way sometimes with Chris. And he's like, oh, you like the neediness, but it's like, it's not the muchness anymore. It's just who I am, and I can give myself what I need. I don't need Chris to give me the need, if that makes sense. So there's just this
Mm.
dynamic of, like you said, there's it's complex, and there's going, if I went back into those healings of past relationships, the pattern was still there of fixing and being like a therapy. And Gabor Mate talks about the dynamics in relationships, and when there's father and mother wounds, the dynamic of relationships change. So say you're
Yeah.
not a man and wife anymore, or relationship anymore, like a partnership, you become like mother or father. He says no one wants to have
Yeah.
sex with the mother or father not in a disgusting way, but it's that dynamic of, as women we become the mothers, don't we? Like we want to mother them. And so that's where I was in my past relationship. So the sex just died. It just died.
Mm-hmm.
So listen to Gabor talk about that was really interesting. And yeah, getting support. Like if I didn't get support on relationships and how I communicate in relationships and how I my self-awareness and the fact that I can have a conversation with my mum and dad about things that I never used to. It just makes such a difference in my life.
I'm going to recommend a book to finish us off. Um, it's around the imago theory. So if you haven't heard of that, it has to do with our early years and the beliefs that we put around our caregivers, and then how when we go into relationships, we're trying to get the needs met that we didn't have met when we were children.
Yeah.
And those can be in positive or negative ways. And so we often do, if we've got the unhealed wounds, we will keep attracting in the people that are very much like the mother or the father that was creating the disruption or the pain in our lives. It's so interesting. So my partner now and I had a conversation about this last night. So he has a podcast and I've been listening to it leading up to the point before we met, because there's like 70 episodes, and it's a really fucking interesting thing to be happening, because only a couple of months ago, so only would have been about 8 weeks before he met me, he finally dropped in the last piece to his mother wounding that he'd spent 3 years navigating through. That was this, he realized that he had this mistrust in the feminine. And he had the mistrust in the feminine because when he was in the womb, his mom had such a traumatic life that she had, like, her whole essence was unsafe. Like, her whole essence was unsafe. He was the firstborn. She poured all of this love onto him, but there was a lot of trauma happening. And so he felt this like mistrust in the feminine. And he's now 37. And so it was literally only like weeks before he met me that he uncovered this in a breathwork experience. And his best friend said to him, like, great, so now you're gonna stop dating people that were like your mother. And we've spoken about how crazy it is, how it can keep you like
Yeah.
in this space of not even realizing what you're manifesting in until you see it. And then when you see it, then you can heal it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is a great book. It's called Finding and Keeping Love, an Imago-based program for getting the love you want. I'm reading through it at the moment, and there's exercises throughout it too that are really, really great. You can do it and do the exercises yourself, or you can do them with your partner as well. Would highly, highly recommend. It's all around this.
That's awesome. And I finished the
Yeah.
book that you recommended, the Pauline's book, The Spiritual Entrepreneur. It was just awesome. I couldn't put it down.
So good.
I know.
One of my favorite all times. All times. Yeah.
Yeah. Just yeah, I couldn't put it down. It was just yeah, it was just like stuff like the stuff you already know, but then she goes into more depth and you're like, oh, like that, just how she words things and then the stories. And yeah, I cried through some of it, so it was nice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, beautiful. Sorry guys. If you got any questions like around any of this, or you want some more resources, feel free to flick us through a message through the podcast or through our private pages. Like there's so much that we could uncover and dive into. And I think that touching on the mother and father wounds felt really good. And then what we'll do is we'll have further episodes, where we talk about family constellation, which is really powerful. We're going to do an episode when I get back from the Gold Coast, because I'm going to the Gold Coast in 2 days with my lover. Talking about like what is possible within the depths of connection and relationships. That's going to be really sexy and really fun and really nourishing. And I'm going to be activated as fuck after
Yes,
going
you
into
are.
a portal with this man. Oh my gosh. I ordered another splash blanket, so now I have two.
That's so funny.
I'm taking
Love
two on
it.
holiday. I bought another one just to go on holiday. And we're even staying in an apartment with a washing machine. I was like, let's still bring two. We still need two.
I love
Oh,
it. I can't
yummy,
wait to
yummy,
hear about it.
yummy.
I love you lots.
Thanks, darlings. We love you.